YouTube. Today I'm going to be debunking more Marxist lies as usual.
Instigated level the arguments which I presented then, and these are all drawn from what Marx said about inflation and wage and prices in a little pamphlet, Wages, Prices and Profit. We've all heard of the wage price spiral, where government ministers say that current waves of strikes are useless since wage rises will just lead to price inflation, that one person's wage...
I don't know how often I've heard that. I don't think it's correct. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. That's what causes the phenomena of constantly increasing prices. Without monetary expansion, we would have slowly decreasing prices because society becomes more productive year by year.
increases another person's prices.
But strikes are useless because the wages of a worker are determined by their productivity, by how much they produce. So you can't really do anything about that by striking. It's not going to change the equation at all.
Increase. This is a very old form of anti-union propaganda, and one that Marx refuted in this short book of his.
My name is Wilmer Gonzalez. I am a Venezuelan lawyer.
The text is based on an address that Marx gave to two sessions of the General Council of the First...
I wonder how many people watch this channel just to fall asleep, because I bet if you're an insomniac, this is the ticket.
And it addresses the contention of one of the members of the council that fighting for wage increases is pointless, since it just results in price increases that cancel them. And as I've said, this remains a common argument against trade unionism. The summary of Weston's argument was that if the working class forces the capitalist class to pay 5 shillings instead of 4 shillings in the shape of money wages, the capitalists will return in the shape of commodities 4 shillings worth instead of 5 shillings worth, and the working class will have to pay 5 shillings for what, before the rise in wages, they had bought for 4.
One problem with this argument is that it's not the capitalist class that sets prices, or wages for that matter. It's market forces.
By raising the price of the commodity sells. Now, does a rise, and more generally a change in the prices of commodities, or do the prices of commodities themselves depend on the mere will of the capitalist? Or are they, on the contrary, circumstances wanted to give effect to that will? If not, the ups and downs.
Note, Marx uses commodity where you would more commonly say good.
Riddle. What would a wage rise do? How would wage rises affect the prices of commodities? Only by affecting the actual proportions between demand for and supply of these.
I believe Marx is correct here.
But what are wages spent on? This is what his response is. He says, as a whole, the working class spends and must spend its income on necessaries. A general rise in the rate of wages would therefore produce a rise in the demand for, and consequently in the market price of, necessities.
Right.
The capitalists who produce these necessities will be compensated for the risen wages by the rising market price of their commodities, so they don't lose anything. But how about the capitalists who produce who don't produce necessities? And this is Marx saying again, and you must not fancy them a small body. If you consider that 2/3 of national produce are consumed by 1/5 of the population, you will understand what an immense proportion of the national produce must be produced in the form of luxuries, or be exchanged for luxuries, and what an immense amount of necessities themselves must be wasted on flunkies, horses, cats, and so forth. Well, those are 19th century figures. At the moment, the top fifth of the UK population consumes 42% of national income. And you can reasonably assume that at least half of that is luxuries. That is the excess they have over the average.
So, I looked at some statistics from a couple different sources. This is the BBC here, which sort of correlates the claim. The blue line being private sector wages. So 2010 to 2020, or like 22. When the video was made, 22. You see, no, I mean, real wages have gone up for both the private and public sector from the period here, 2010, to the period when the video was made about a year ago, so 2023 start. Even here, it looks like, I mean, it depends exactly where on the graph you start and finish, but it looks like, at the very least, wages have been increasing slightly. That's real wages. These are adjusted for inflation. I looked at some other data, and it showed wage increases as well. But also note in this chart that where he starts is sort of a cherry-picked area. You're right near the peak, and then there's an immediate fall. You know, if you go back to 2000, then we see a much more dramatic increase of wages between this 20-year period. And also, if you look at public sector wages, they're actually higher than private sector wages on average. So England has a huge amount of their GDP in government spending. So whenever you have that much government spending and the high taxes, that it's going to mean you're going to have less economic growth, including less wage rate growth. Of course, Marx predicted that pressures would lead to wages going to subsistence levels. So the fact that wages have increased almost steadily since the Industrial Revolution is a bit of a problem for Marxists. They tend to just deny it.
Income in the country. So the direct expenditure of the upper classes on luxuries is around 22% of national income. Now we know that real wages in Britain have fallen 5.5% since 2010. So if you reduce the luxury consumption
Citation needed.
classes merely by a quarter, that would make up the wage loss that the working classes have faced.
Thinking Rapid might be out of your budget? Think again. Many of our customers have found Rapid.
Now, Marx looks at what the effect of wage rises would be on luxury production. What would be the position of capitalists who do not produce necessaries? For the fall in the rate of profit consequent on the general rise of wages, they would not compensate themselves by a rise in the price of commodities, because the demand for those commodities would not have increased. Their income would have decreased, and from this decreased income they would have to pay more for the same amount of necessities. That wouldn't be all. As their income had diminished.
So the error that this guy's making here is imagining that you can just force wages up. And the source of the error is the Marxist view of where profit originates. The view that that profit is basically taken from the workers. That that capitalists make profit by expropriating the surplus labor value of the worker. But that's not how it works. So the way that businessmen make profit, or entrepreneurs make profit, is by doing a better job of forecasting consumer demand than their competition. And in a competitive economy, competitive marketplace, workers are already getting paid pretty close to their marginal revenue value product, or how much they contribute to the productive process. So a very simple way to explain this is to imagine a man working in a widget factory. His name's Tom. He makes 5 widgets an hour. He gets paid $5 an hour. There's another employee, Joe. He makes 10 widgets an hour. He gets paid $10 an hour. Of course, productivity is almost never as easy to measure as this, but this simplified model really explains what's going on when it's determining what a worker's wages are. And in fact, there are some employees that do work on a piecework system. For most jobs, it's nothing like that, but that's the role of the manager or whoever to determine the value of their labor. So it just doesn't make sense to somehow force a business to pay more than the market value for the labor would be. For one, you can't really do it. I mean, you stop working there, they just hire somebody else. In a perfect world, I mean, sure, you could strike, but then they could just fire you because you stopped working your job. Now, maybe in our world, with all the pro-union legislation, it's a little more complicated. But even if you were to compel some employer to pay, 20% above the market rate as their competitors, I don't think that firm's going to be able to withstand those sort of cost overruns on a daily basis. Most businesses could not afford that, especially if labor was a huge part or a large part of their operating expenses. I mean, a lot of businesses aren't even making money in the first place. They're especially newer ones. They're operating at a loss when they get running, or to make up the huge investment in capital. And if you try to do this through the minimum wage, then you're just you're not. It's not going to work. You're just going to price workers out of the marketplace because it's not like a firm has a fixed labor strategy. Going back to the widget example, let's set the minimum wage at $7 an hour. Well, clearly the widget factory guy is only going to hire people with a productivity of more than 7 widgets an hour, more than $7 an hour. They're going to hire the $10 per hour guy and not hire the $5 hour per guy. So if you want wages to increase, then the only way to do it is by through capital accumulation, having a more productive economy.
So overall, he's saying.
So this whole line of thought is built upon a shaky foundation that you can just sort of force wages up through the power of will alone. That's not how it works.
The production of luxuries is less profitable.
Labor is a price like anything else. You can't just will it up. It's subject to market forces such as just like the production of necessities or the productions of luxuries are.
Shift to producing consumption goods for workers' wages instead, and real wages rise. Now, what Wages, Prices and Profit was a speech given by Marx just after he'd wrote Capital and before it was published, and he debated with Engels whether the pamphlet should be published or not, thinking it would detract from his book which was about to come out, and in fact it wasn't published until after his death. But in Wages, Prices and Profit, which I can strongly recommend as an introduction to Marx's economic thought, he uses techniques that he describes in full in volume 2 of Capital, which is devoted to what he calls reproduction schemes. So I'm going to now illustrate Marx's argument about inflation by drawing in the apparatus that he presents in Capital to show his reasoning.
It doesn't really make sense to use inflation to mean any change in price. If you think about it, like inflation, what the word means in a common context, like a balloon inflating, you're seeing a steady increase across the whole balloon, right? So that's the common sense usage of the word inflation is like prices rising everywhere because of an increase in the money supply, not just any change in price that can occur.